Madam Speaker, I have long taken an interest in constitutional issues, and I don't think we can consider this particular piece of legislation outside of a broader context. The fact of the matter is, Madam Speaker, that we find ourselves as a country in an unusual position where we have a government in office which has decided to take a unilateral approach to the subject of Senate reform. And I will certainly be discussing the bill and the position of the Liberal Party with respect to the particular piece of legislation in front of it, but it's impossible for us to consider the bill without also recognizing that on this very same day, the government has decided to announce several other measures with respect to the unilateral reform of the Senate. And this particular piece of legislation, which provides for the House of Commons, if you will, taking upon itself to transform the questions of conflict of interest and of ethical behavior of members of the other House is, in our view, not the necessary or right approach to take. The Senate has an ethics regime. The Senate has an independent ethics officer. The Senate has a structure which it has created, which reflects the views of senators according to legislation which has been passed and approved. And if the government wanted to initiate a discussion with respect to they had particular issues about any ethical matter affecting a senator or any ethical matter affecting the conduct of the members of the Senate, they know perfectly well what they could do. They could start that conversation and that discussion in the Senate, with senators making those decisions with respect to their conduct. But instead of which, well, first of all, Madam Speaker, one can't help but observe that 2 days after the Minister of Finance doesn't even announce, but lets slide or lets slip the fact that the public accounts of the country are in a much greater shambles than he was prepared to admit even 37 days ago, the government has now decided, as a matter of political strategy, to change the channel once again and to get back and once again bring out the somewhat tired and hoary subject of Senate reform in one manner or another as one of its priorities. Et je dois dire, Madame.
And I should say, Madam Speaker, that this is an issue that political science students have been looking at for a long time. That is the issue of the Canadian Senate and whether it is possible to reform the institution, whether it's possible to change the nature of the Senate. This is a Senate which was established by a constitutional process. Members of the Senate are appointed by the government. They are unelected, and they reflect the status of the Confederation from long ago. And many people have asked whether or not this institution can be reformed. Now, Madam Speaker, in the 70s, when I was already an elected member of this House, there were very clear proposals on this issue, but the Supreme Court said that if you want to change the nature of the Senate, if you want to change the nature of this institution, you cannot do so unilaterally. You must respect the Canadian Constitution you must respect the fact that this is a federal institution which does not belong to the House of Commons, nor to the Prime Minister's office, nor to the government in power. In fact, it is an institution which is enshrined in the Constitution, and it cannot be changed unilaterally, even if the government wants so desperately to make reforms. Whether or not it's the reformists who want to do so or not, it's just not possible. So, at the same time, when the minister is making proposals about the ethics position in the Senate, quite clearly this issue of ethics has been settled already. If there is a problem with a senator, you just have to refer the matter to the ethics office of the Senate and a solution can be found. However, we have a government that wants the Senate to reflect its own point of view. That is the point of view of the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister's office wants to reform this institution as it sees fit. Now, Madam Speaker, I gave a speech a couple of weeks ago on the jurisdiction of our House, that is to deal with matrimonial property rights on Aboriginal reserves. And I spoke directly to my colleagues in the Bloc Québécois about this. It's been some time that we have accepted the fact that we have a constitution which guarantees the Aboriginal people a certain number of rights, and under the Constitution it is not possible for the House of Commons to make unilateral decisions as if we were not a confederation, as if we didn't have a senator. It is not easy to change the Senate. I've sat around a table on 2 occasions to try and reform the Senate. It's not easy. That's life in Canada, and that's the fact of the matter. Now, when the premiers speak on this issue, they usually say that it's important that the provinces have input, that they be consulted, and that they be stakeholders in the decision-making process, so that the federalist nature of our country is reflected in any decision. Madam Speaker, this is a federation, and that means, well, if it is the case, Minister, and the Minister seems to agree, then, Minister, you have to respect the Canadian Constitution. And if you believe that you have the power to unilaterally change the status of the Senate, the status of the senators, and the ethical status of the Senate, then go before the Supreme Court, seek a reference to determine what the House of Commons can really do to unilaterally change an institution which is enshrined and rooted in our Constitution. I don't know what the justices are going to say. Neither the Minister nor I are justices, even if we have ambitions to become so. But we're not there yet, are we? We need to respect the fact that we have a Constitution, and given that we have one, we need to respect it. But here's where I take issue. There's this reformist ideological stance which permeates this government. This spirit attests to a determination, a resolve to unilaterally reform this Canadian institution as they see fit, in the image of the reformists. That's what they want to do. And even if I don't like something that the Senate does, I have to respect and uphold the Constitution. It is a chamber of this Parliament. It was created under the Canadian Constitution, and we have to make any reform of the Senate through the Canadian Constitution. And if I am speaking in an impassioned fashion, it's not because I have aspirations to become a senator one day. It's because I understand that the Constitution needs to be seen as a whole. We cannot do what the Conservatives insist they want to continue to do. That is, change the nature of the Senate without getting the necessary support from the provinces.
You cannot change unilaterally the nature and structure of the Canadian Senate. You cannot change unilaterally how it is made up, who it is made up of, and you have to respect the independence and the integrity of that institution. If you want to change with respect to the conduct of the Senate, you start with the Senate. You start with the senators. You start with your colleagues in the Senate. And you start with a process which respects the independence of that institution. We cannot do that unilaterally ourselves. You may get a majority. You may get the majority that will give you the ability to get this House into, you may get it into second reading, you may get it into third reading, you may be able to do it. I don't know where the votes will go. I know my colleagues in the New Democratic Party continue to take a puritanical position with respect to the Senate. And I will only say to my colleagues in the New Democratic Party, name me the federation in the world that does not have a second chamber. You will not find it. There is no federation in the world that does not have a second chamber. And as our second the member from Calgary, my colleague from Calgary, says they're elected. Look, this isn't about what I think, what the member from Toronto Centre says. If I was writing a constitution in the sky, what would it look like? Any more than the member from Calgary could do such a thing. That's not the point. We are not capable. We do not have the power in this House to unilaterally change the nature of the Senate. And that's something which this party opposite, the government opposite, simply does not understand. You cannot do it. It can't be done. And they will continue to try to do it, and they should not continue to try to do it. They should be told to just stop. Stop trying to change the dial and change the subject. Stop going back to your tired old ideologies. If you want to sit down and change the Senate, set up a meeting with the provinces, sit down in negotiation, and go back to the process of constitutional reform. And I wish you the best of success in doing so. If that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it.
Order, please. Order. Order, please. The member is from Toronto Centre is speaking. He will have the floor. Other members will have an opportunity to ask questions. If they continue to interrupt now, I will not recognize them when it's time for questions. The honourable member for Toronto.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I admit I was in full flight. I will try to come down to a lower decibel level. I know that the member opposite is well known for never losing his temper or for having arguments in his office, so I will not make making any further comments. So I will get to but let me just say, Madam Speaker, that even this modest bill, the minister might say, look, all we're simply trying to do is create one regime for the regulation of ethics in the House and the Senate. They should be the same. It's no big deal. It's nothing much to be affected by. There's nothing much to worry about. All I can say to the minister is, look, I'm not the kind of breaking things if it's not broken, you don't have to fix it. There's nothing broken about ethics in the Senate. There's no crisis. There's no crisis of ethics in the Senate. There's no crisis. We have an independent ethics officer in the Senate. We have an independent structure in the Senate. They're able to do their business. they do what they do, and some of the things the Senate does, in my opinion, are very good. There are some outstanding senators who are in the House, and some of them are members of the Conservative Party. Some of them I count among my dearest friends, and they do studies, and they do work, and they travel widely. They issue reports on public policy, which have had a major impact on the public policy of the country going back decades. And I don't think that's the structure we've been given. It's not the perfect structure. Do I think it's a wonderful structure? No, I don't. I don't think it's a wonderful structure, but it's what we've got. And we simply, the member from Calgary says, let's change it. I say to the member from Calgary, we have a Constitution. We go back to square one. The Constitution does not give the House of Commons the power to unilaterally dictate the conduct of senators. It does not give us the power to unilaterally dictate how they will run their affairs. They have an ethics officer that deals with issues. We have laws that deal with these questions. We have laws which apply to members of the House of Commons and members of the Senate. There's no need for us to do what's being proposed. It's absolutely unnecessary. It's a classic case of changing the dial and changing the subject and trying to make something out of nothing. But it's part of a bigger strategy on the part of the government, Madam Speaker. It's part of a bigger approach, and that has to do with all that they're seeking to do with the Senate. And all I can say to the honourable members is they're wasting their time and they're wasting our time, because it simply isn't possible for us to do, and for the government of Canada, for public policy to achieve unilaterally by one House voting one way or another what can't be achieved by a broader consensus of the country with respect to changing the Senate. And that, Madam Speaker, is why the Liberal Party will be opposing this legislation.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I listened to the honourable member's comments carefully, and I noticed that we have something in common. He was a member of Parliament in the 70s, and I was born in the 70s. I also noticed that the member seems to not be fully informed about the bill. He talks about unilateral action by the House of Commons. I don't know where this is coming from, Mr. Speaker. The bill today, or the bill is going to go through, assuming it passes this chamber, both houses of Parliament, and we are looking for the Senate to support this bill. The Liberal Party just announced that they were opposing this bill, but in April of 2006, they supported a bill with this provision in it. So they support it and they don't support it. The member opposite seems to be a bit of a anti-Senate reformist, a defeatist. He wants to open up the Constitution during an economic crisis. And I don't think that's appropriate. What we're asking Parliament to do together is to work together to improve the upper chamber. And this bill does that, along with the other piece of legislation. It's absolutely constitutional within the realm. And instead of the Liberal Party opposing the government, it should support the government in its mandate that it's received during the last several elections. And I know the member's been around for a very, very, very long time, and he will know that that the people of Canada want Senate reform. And as a youngish person, I know young people want the Senate to reflect the realities of the 21st century. Why won't the Liberal Party reflect the realities of the 21st century?
The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
I take no offense at the minister's comments about my color of my hair and the fact that I was here. The fact that I was here when he was born, and I appreciate that, and I take it in the spirit of good humor in which it was offered. And since I've just come back from my nap. Madam Speaker, I'm feeling very invigorated this afternoon, and I'm quite happy to take on the comments. Look, I just say to the minister, look, you yourself said this is alongside the other pieces of legislation. That's why I think we have to consider them all as a package. I think we all have to understand that this is part of a common approach which the government has taken, and I sincerely disagree with the minister in the sense of are they constitutional or not. I just say if the minister has confidence that they're constitutional, he should simply refer to them to the Supreme Court of Canada and let the Supreme Court of Canada say yea or nay. That's what Mark McGuigan had to do when he was the member of the government of Mr. Trudeau in 1977 or 78, and he had to refer the legislation and deal with it in that context. We've been through this movie before. This movie didn't start. I know the Prime Minister's been watching a lot of tapes and movies, but a number of us are aware of what goes on in tapes and movies, and we've been through this movie before. I'm certainly not recommending that we go back to the constitutional swamp. That's not what I'm recommending. What I'm recommending is that before the government launches us into a very expensive set of litigation with the provinces, because I can assure the minister that if he follows through this legislation with the other pieces of legislation, I can promise him he will be sued. He will be sued by the other provinces, by many provinces. They will sue the federal government. They'll say this is ultra vires, the powers of the federal government. We'll go to the courts of appeal in the different provinces. It may be Newfoundland, it may be Manitoba, it may be Ontario, it may be Quebec, it may be New Brunswick. And one of those cases, and then it'll get appealed from there. Whoever loses, it'll get appealed up to the Supreme Court. And my profession, of which I'm a very proud member, will do very well out of this. You are setting up a legal nest that will go forward, and it's not a good idea, Mr. Speaker.
And comments. The honourable member for St. John's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened with great interest to the member for Ottawa Centre, his vigorous and enthusiastic Toronto Centre, his vigorous and enthusiastic defence of the status quo. And I know that the Senate has served the Liberal Party very well in the past, and I guess he's hoping that it will continue to do so. In fact, one of the senators, a very admirable man, Senator Prudhomme, has threatened to run, in fact, for the House of Commons when he retires from the Senate, so his commitment to Parliament is very strong. The NDP, of course, is in favour of an accountable, an elected and accountable Parliament, and of course the Senate is part of Parliament. Does the member actually think that we have such a rigid constitution that the political will of the people could not be tested by a referendum in terms of do they want an elected Parliament or do they not? I mean, I know you're talking about the rigidity of legalities and what might happen, but this bill would have to go to the Senate. I don't suppose the Senate's going to pass it. That might allow the government to appoint a few more senators, and we get into a whole race over who's going to control the Senate. But shouldn't we actually try to find out what the will of the Canadian people is? Do they want an elected Parliament, or are they satisfied with a moribund institution?
The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
Well, Madam Speaker, there are some things which one can set one's clock by, and certainly the predictability of the response from my friends in the New Democratic Party with respect to the subject of the Senate is well known. And I can only tell the honourable member that I would have thought that having served in a provincial institution like me, in the provincial parliament, as I have, and he knows very well the provincial situation in every province, we are a federal country. Every federal country in the world has a second chamber. Some of them are elected, some of them are appointed, some of them are half appointed, half elected, some of them are elected on a proportional basis, some of them are elected by the provincial chambers. There's a whole variety of techniques by which second chambers are chosen. I've made it very clear I'm not defending the status quo. I'm simply looking at what I know is their agenda, which I'm surprised you would support. But what I also know is the case is that I would suspect that the Premier of Newfoundland would be very troubled by a unilateral change in the Constitution of Canada, an attempt to do that by the reformists on the other side of the chamber. I'd be very surprised if that was something that he thought was a great idea. I would be stunned if Premier Charest was in favour of it, or if indeed any provincial premier thought this was a wonderful idea. We're discussing a very modest proposal on the face of it, which is to deal with the question of ethics. But it isn't just a question of ethics. It's the question of the extent to which we respect the independence of the other chamber.
Questions and comments? The honourable member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour, short question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a wonderful speech by my colleague, and you know, when you come to this place, you realize the work that the Senate does. People like Mike Kirby, the work that he did on health and in mental health. I was in the Calgary Social Forum last week. Senator Hugh Segal, progressive conservative, appointed by a Liberal, speaking about poverty, has a great deal of credibility. I think there are changes that are needed. In Nova Scotia, we have 10 senators. Alberta has 6. There are things that need to be done, but my colleague is quite right that this is not the way to do them. It won't add up to anything. And I wonder if there's any reason that Canadians should believe that this is anything other than just an attempt to divert people's attention from a government that's got the finances of this country out of control, a $50 billion deficit, people who can't get employment insurance, that they've totally lost control of the government, and that this is just another attempt to divert attention from that.
Before I return the floor to the member from Toronto Centre, I want to remind members that we don't usually refer to members of the other place by their given names. With that, the honourable member for Toronto Centre.
So I assume, Mr. Speaker, that means we can use nicknames? What I thought, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from my colleague from Dartmouth Cole Harbour. I just think I do. One of my favorite films, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the tapes that I'm sure the leader of the government is watching, is Wag the Dog. And I think the Wag the Dog is a great movie because it's really about, you should see it. I've seen the President of the Treasury Board. I know he hasn't got much to do because the money's not going out the door at all. So it's just put a cork in the government and just stopped it. And well, perhaps I'm only speaking for my purposes of my own writing, Mr. Speaker. But thank you. I wish you would. I just say to the honourable member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour, I think this is an attempt to change the subject. My point is, it is, on the face of it, you say, well, we want to have one ethics officer for both chambers. What's the big deal? The answer is, maybe not much. But the fact is, the Senate says we want to have our own ethics officer dealing with our own situations, and we will apply the law fairly, and we have the ability to apply the law fairly. The House of Commons should have sufficient faith in our institution that this is what we'll do. And I just say to my colleagues, I do think the government is trying to change the subject, and I think for them to get back to this question of Senate bashing, I know it'll please the members of the New Democratic Party and others who say, yeah, this is a great thing to do, but I don't know why they're taking the bait, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't take the bait, and we have no intention on this side of taking the bait. Thank you.